So Chris, one of the things that I want to do in this second session with you is we talked last time about the landscape and how to sort of deal with people and the humility that's required, and I completely endorse all of that. Really, what I'd really like to do now is to get behind some of the mechanics of debt collection. And find out a little bit from you in terms of what are you seeing out there that people are doing that's right and that's wrong, and that potentially can lead down a road which doesn't get the result that people are looking for.
Yes, Steve, thank you. I think we're finding a number of organisations right now that are restricting credit. They're worried about the future. They want to hang on to their cash because they're uncertain whether they're going to have it at the end of the week. And ultimately, that's led to some difficult cash flow problems with their creditors. Ultimately, what I've seen that's been very, very positive is that there is a way around it. Some have been able to bend their credit policy, if you like, and say, actually, we know you haven't paid everything from the month before. However, we will take a chance on you on this one occasion and allow the stock to go out of our warehouse because we know you've got sales. Failure not to do that may lead to the customer or business in question going under.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
and
it's a bit of a quid pro quo, isn't it, effectively, is if you actually stall the way that somebody can actually make money, then actually you're definitely not going to get paid the things that you owe. There's a difficult balancing act between having somebody who needs some supply but hasn't paid you already.
Indeed.
Tell us a little bit about, from your experience in how an organisation should approach that, because I'm sure there's a lot that are having that type of issue.
Ultimately, you've got the problem where it's black or white, paid or not paid, and I was involved with a large warehousing organisation recently that was restricting stock to somebody that was selling on one of the TV channels, QVC or whatever,
right,
and had got a number of customers for their products but hadn't paid in full because they were still waiting cash themselves, so the circle goes round. And rather than chasing this organisation for debt, I was actually chasing them for stock. So
right,
a complete turnaround. And I managed to get hold of the MD. That's the message. Always go as high as you can,
yep,
and make sure you can speak to those people.
Yep.
I know that a lot of organisations say they don't take calls. Well, they do take calls and they can be spoken to. And if you do it in the right tone and the right way, you can get the right result. And ultimately, despite the fact that he was adamant he wasn't going to release this stock, they did think about it and they did release the stock. They could see why that should be done. Now, they may not have done it in all the cases, but it certainly helped this particular customer.
And that's a really great message, because at the end of the day, what you're demonstrating there is that there is a process that you can go through. Now, clearly, from the other side, that organisation would have reflectively looked at the credit history, the trading history of that organisation, and made a judgment call. Indeed. There's a risk. It's a risk, isn't it, Chris? At the end of the day, there's a risk involved here. But they looked at the risk and said, actually, it's more risky that this organisation is never going to buy from us again because they're not there than it is to risk the fact that they might not actually pay their bill.
And that is a common sense approach, rather than relying on the strict credit rules that they may have observed in the past.
Which are different, aren't they? Let's face it, as we said in the last series, is that we're in this new norm. Everybody is struggling to understand where the future is, and also trying to conserve some cash, are worried about the future. So it is this whole idea of there being a slowdown in the way that cash moves around is obvious, and most organisations with that understand where that is will have some sort of plan and mitigation in place for that, I would have thought.
They would
wouldn't you?
do, and they are going to have to be a lot more prudent with the way they manage their cash flow. But completely pulling up the drawbridge is not the answer, as we've seen. And there is a risk, unfortunately, that a number of businesses will be affected if that approach is taken. So I'm really hoping that through you, and I may not be able to do it on my own, but to get this message out there,
Yep.
that's
what these are about.
If we can use this more tolerant approach, we will find that more businesses, big or small, will survive if this approach is more through tolerance.
Yeah, and that's a good thing for everybody, I think. So, if there was one thing that you needed to put your finger on in terms of an organisation that was struggling to understand that particular journey we've just been talking about, what would it be, Chris? What if you were walking into an organisation and you saw some issues in that respect? Where would you take that conversation?
I would make it very personal, and really I would go in using the right tone and language and say, let's rip up the rule book to a certain extent. We need to, from a consultancy basis, look at how we're dealing with our customers, because the old methods are not going to work now. What new ones can we adopt? Can we allow more credit? No. Or can we allow more sort of installment-based payment plan that will work? The vital thing is to cut the customers off completely will have a very bad effect on businesses across the whole sphere of business, I think. And it's about trying to change the mindset. So the mindset is, let's look at new ways that we can do things, at least on a temporary basis. If that doesn't work, then we'll have to go back, but at least risk it once.
Yeah. Do you think it's interesting? That's created a question in my mind. So actually, and those organisations that are really large on this will probably go, blimey, thank you very much, Steve Groom. You're not in reality, but actually, there's a large to small approach here. So those large organisations that are in the supply chain, they are much more readily available. They have much more ready available credit terms and cash available at lower interest rates than, for example, a mere mortal down at the small other end of the spectrum that's actually scratching away trying to get some business in. Do you think is the conversation, does the conversation permeate up that way, so that obviously if you go to a different type of credit term or you go to a repayment plan, essentially what you're doing is you're suggesting that the supplier is going to have to take effectively a hit on that level of debt, not a hit in terms of totally, but is going to have to service that level of debt. Indeed. Which they wouldn't normally do. What's your perspective there, Chris?
Well, that's a very good point, Steve, a very good question, because it will mean that there is a little bit more risk for them, but without doing that, without giving them that bit of breathing space, we will find that the businesses, their customers, will be impacted. So we need to look at how available their own cash is. We would hope that they've got a lot of cash, but financial planning and cash flow management is so vital right now. They need to take a long view approach as opposed to the normal 30 days, 7 days. And that would be my message. Get on board with the right people and explain how they can perhaps change their policy. But let's go long view. Let's look into the future. Let's not restrict ourselves to a very short vision of where we are.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good message, which goes and dovetail into that humility message that we talked about before. So I suppose really what you're really advocating there is that being transparent in terms of how you're managing your cash is actually, if you have those conversations with your suppliers upstream, that's going to foster the right conversation in terms of being able to put a plan together.
Indeed. I mean, one of my key points is that, you have open discussions, very open discussions with all your customers and all your suppliers, so that everyone knows where they are, because we've got to make this count. We've got to make sure that we get through this. Yeah,
and they've got to mitigate that risk and do those type of things. And that's really, really, really solid advice. I'm really glad we started that conversation. And I know that where we're going with the next series of this is actually you're going to talk about how you set yourself up to see those things and look at the warning signs and stuff like that. Indeed. So really appreciate your time again today, Chris, and been again really insightful.
Thank you, Steve. Absolutely wonderful.